So welcome back to the JT Follows JC podcast. It does not have a name yet, but we do have our first guest, and it's
Oh, really? I'm the first one.
The first guest. That's right. Well,
Wow, this is monumental.
This is the second podcast, first guest, and
Cool.
Today we have my boy Luke Caverns on here, who's his TikTok channel is blowing up. What do you got? About 250 followers, 50,000 followers now.
About to hit 250.
Nice. Like I said, he's not shadow banned. He's doing really well.
Not shadow banned, unfortunately.
Not yet. He's gonna say one true thing that's gonna get him in trouble probably soon, but yes. Right now he's doing well. But I wanted to ask you, Luke. So listen, you're a young guy. I know you do ancient civilizations. Like, how did you get into that?
So actually I've got it. Yeah, I've got it right here. Hold on. So this book, so this was printed actually the same month I was born, August 97, and my grandparents had it, and and my grandparents had this book. It's called Lost Cities, 50 Discoveries in World Archaeology. And when I was really young, I watched the movie Troy with Brad Pitt, and I don't know what I loved about it. Just the all the fighting and
Brad Pitt's muscles.
Yeah. But but I was also kind of enamored by the ancient times, and like every kid, really into the medieval times and things like that, even though I didn't know the difference. So I was super into Troy, and my grandpa told me that this book that he had on his bookshelf had Troy in it. So he gave me that book to borrow when I was about 6, and I've not given it back to him since then. And so, man, since I can remember, I've been reading about lost cities and stuff, and I was into all kinds of other things before I started making videos on lost civilizations. And I just never really thought that so many people would be interested in it, So it's kind of just one of those things I've been doing ever since I was a kid. I've always been into the ancient world, pretty much.
Well, yeah, I had I think as a kid, as a young boy myself, and a kid of the 80s who graduated high school before 97.
That's crazy.
I was a big Indiana Jones fan. I think like Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's got to be, if it's not my favorite movie, it's in the top 3. And so I love that movie is, and I know, and I can't help but see the look you've got in your videos with the hat. So I mean, I don't think that was a coincidence.
No, not at all.
But it's so that stuff is fascinating. It's just this, obviously the adventure, the mystery, like what are these, like the thing that, and I think that like Indiana Jones does a good job. And now I didn't realize that movie was probably more true than I realized. It's like the relic hunting, So There's this long kind of been this myth of this relic hunting, but it's real.
Oh, always was.
And it's like they're showing like the different factions, like the bad guys, like the Nazis are coming. Then you have we're not said that word. The Germans from the 30s are coming, and then you have like the American, the good guys are looking, and they're sending Indiana Jones to find the Lost Ark, and then eventually like the Holy Grail, and then of course in the Shakara stones, and you find out it's like that they've done this. I mean, that you have like the Templars, you have some of the like the Rosicrucians, all over the time. All these people have been looking for these things.
Relic hunting's always been huge since what's really crazy is it's so big, and relic hunting has been around for so long that it was actually happening. So think about this. Think about being in Egypt in 1000 AD, so 3000 years ago, and there were museums in Egypt of ancient Egypt. So you could go walk around in a museum and look at 3000 years ago and look at ancient artifacts that also came from Egypt. And officially what we know about ancient museums, this was something I thought of recently, if I were in ancient Egypt, would I be able to go to a museum in ancient Egypt? And the answer would be yes, there were museums back then. But what they were is they were really wealthy people that would hire like mercenaries or grunts or whatever, and they'd send them out into these ruins. So you got to think, by the time, and we'll talk about him on another podcast, but Ramesses II, who was potentially the pharaoh during the Exodus, by the time he was Egypt was already ancient. So, I'm sorry, by the time he was pharaoh, Egypt was already ancient. And so if you lived back during that time, you could probably go to a museum that he created. I believe that there is a museum that he created. There's something like that. And you could go there and you could see artifacts from ancient Egypt that where he had sent people out and they had just looted everything and then brought it to a certain place. And then he would charge people to come and look at all of it. You know what I'm saying? So people have been looting relics since the beginning of time. It's just a very human thing.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I'm not sure who I remember hearing this from, but it was like, if you think of like a context of that is like, everyone knows Cleopatra. It's interesting to think that we're closer to Cleopatra than she was to like even the mainstream narrative when the pyramids were built.
Yeah.
So
that's exactly the right way to say it.
And so that's a hard thing for us to wrap our minds around. It's like, because we think that's ancient, but actually, I was reading like this kind of I was reading the Genesis 6 conspiracy by Gary Wayne, and it talks about a lot of ancient kind of like a lot of stuff that happens before the flood. And when the Bible talks about the ancient times, and I'm sure this is probably true of the Dynastic Egyptians, when they talk about ancient times, they're talking about antediluvian. They're talking about pre-flood, because it's like, because there's a separation between, there's obviously the big dividing line between the ancient times and now modern times.
Yeah, no, that's 100% true. That would be one of the coolest answers if you could get it. If you were to travel back to Egypt 4,000 years ago, which is still 500 years after they claimed that the pyramids on the Giza Plateau were built, if you could walk around Egypt at that time, or you could go to Alexandria and talk to, the professors there, and listen to their stories about the history or the ancient history of that time, that would be so interesting, because so much of that is just, it's just gone. You know what I mean?
And I was going to say that right there is kind of like, and this is kind of why I'm talking to you anyways, is the fact that before I kind of woke up spiritually and I started to kind of really like seek truth out in kind of on all facets, I started watching all the ancient stuff, and I was fascinated as we were talking about Egypt. Like one of the structures that everyone always comes back to is the Great Pyramid. And I was watching shows about, like, from Joe Rogan would bring on guys like Graham Hancock and some of these other guys, and they would talk about, like, I think some people like don't understand. It's like, oh, what's the big deal? It's a big triangle. But when they actually show the scope of it, and when they show like the scale of like a person next to one of these blocks, and then realizing they're all different shapes, but they're all level, they're massive. How did they do that? Like how did they do that? And then you watch, like, I was saying, one of the guys we like on YouTube, we both like, is Bright Insight. And I was recently watching a video where he was showing the mainstream narrative of how these things were done, and it's absurd. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, they say the only evidence that of the type of stone cutting tools that they claim that they used were, I believe, like brass saws and maybe some other things, but nothing, or brass, copper saws. And they've tested it, and they say, what is it, in 24 hours they can cut like 3/4 of an inch, and what, I'll make videos about this, and people will go, oh, well, the answer is you just have a lot of slaves. Well, first off, the very first thing is wrong, because even the mainstream evidence of the workers that were used were not slaves. They were employed. So right there, most people who claim to know what they're talking about don't. But these blocks are a lot of them are about 2 tons, and they're quarried from, dozens, hundreds of miles away, and they're cut on 6 sides perfectly. They're perfect. They're perfectly cut on 6 sides, and you've got this massive, man, or what are they, 600-ton pyramids?
Well, the thing I was hearing today was they average about 2.5 tons a piece. There's 2.5 million.
I'm sorry. Yeah, not 600 tons. Was it 600 billion tons? It's something insane. Or 60 billion tons. It's something.
Well, but it's funny you say they're perfect, but they're not perfect, but they fit perfectly together, and they happen to be level. Like that's the insane part when you think, like, if you had like perfect shaped stones, like if you have perfectly shaped stones, obviously we know ground's not completely level all the way. Getting the thing level would be hard already, but then you have different shaped stones that are fit so perfectly together that you can't even stick like a pin or like a razor blade in between the stones.
Yeah. And well, it's not just that. So they had to, make the ground perfectly level, and they're not using mortar. You know what I mean? They're not basically, they're not in a way sticking these stones together to try to create a less perfect structure. They have 2-ton stones that they loaded. They say that they loaded them. Have you ever seen what the river boats are like in Egypt? They're these long, thin, skinny boats. And archaeologists say that, or Egyptologists and archaeologists say that they were loaded, and the weight, it was like weight distribution. I would love to see one of them try that. I
want to say put like 5 of them in there.
Yeah. They'll say, oh, well, what they did is they would have the boat, they have the boat flattened, like it's like a flat top, and they'll put, they just balance out the weight. Yeah, right. I mean, how do you do that? How do you get the stones on there?
Well, yeah, I think more to the point, if anybody's asking at home, like, why does this matter? It matters because a lot of our history is based off of Egypt. So like,
it's just an insane amount.
It's basically like what they say. So we were hunter and gatherer. Like this is the mainstream narrative that we were basically running around in the woods, loincloths and all, trying to find food. And then one day everyone said, hey, let's build this massive pyramid for this kid, for this guy, so we could put him in here when he dies.
Yep.
But meanwhile, like, so they have a linear progression of man, because obviously it's like we go from slime to a rat to a monkey, then to kind of a caveman, and then we're this guy who's going to find food, and then we're building like structures that have not been surpassed almost by today's standards, like right away.
Yeah, it's ridiculous that they say it's so, they speak out of 2 sides of their mouth on that, because they say that they were river people in Egypt, and that they Egypt was kind of divided between Upper and Lower Egypt, and that they were not necessarily nomadic, but they weren't creating art. They didn't have architecturally progressed civilizations. As far as I know, they weren't building huge buildings. I mean, you would think that something like the Sphinx temple, or not even that. I mean, anything in Egypt that's like a subpar structure, and maybe none of them are left, but you would think it would be a gradual incline to getting to the pyramid. But what they say that they do is, one, they say that they built Djoser's pyramid first, which is the step pyramid of Saqqara, if you've seen that one.
Yeah.
So they say that they built that first, and that was designed by Imhotep. And then Imhotep turns around and he designs Khufu's pyramid, which is the Great Pyramid on the Giza Plateau, the biggest one. And then he designed the Red Pyramid, and I don't know if they say he designed Khafre's pyramid, which was Khufu's either son or grandson. And it's just strange because, so this is really a strange thing. So they say that it was built to honor his life, and everything. So they take on the biggest construction at the very precipice of progressed human civilization. They take on the biggest construction project in human history. They do it perfectly to a T. And then at the very end, they go, yeah, we're not going to decorate the inside of this whatsoever. It's going to be completely naked. There's not going to be one hieroglyph on the inside of this that even would let you know that this is dedicated to the god king Khufu. And not only do they do that, they build Khafre's pyramid. They do the same thing again, like 20 or 40 years later. They do the same thing, and then they build Menkaur's pyramid. All three are equilateral, perfect pyramids with the exact same, building structures and everything. And in 3 different generations, they do not put a one thing on the inside of it related to either of those 3 pharaohs. And then they do the same thing just south of it along the Nile, along the Red Pyramid, which looks exactly like the Great Pyramid, and not too many people know about it. And it's pretty enigmatic as well. There's no hieroglyphs on the inside. But they say that Djoser's pyramid was built before the pyramids on the Giza Plateau. And if you and I walked into Djoser's pyramid, it is so obviously a tomb. Part of his body was found in the tomb. His sarcophagus is there, and there are hieroglyphs depicting him in the subterranean chambers. And so that is so obviously a tomb. So they did that for Djoser, and then they turn around for 4 different huge construction projects and do nothing like that at all. It's just bizarre, Well,
so basically what the narrative is they found a pyramid that was a tomb. Therefore, all the pyramids were tombs. Basically.
Yes. Well, a lot of pharaohs tried to replicate. So aside from the Great Pyramids on the Giza Plateau and the Red Pyramid, the greatest pyramid, in my opinion, is the Pyramid of Saqqara, which would be Djoser's pyramid. That's the best one of all of them, and it's the best. I think it's the biggest. There may be another one there's so Djoser's pyramid is the one that's got really notable steps. And then you've got another one, and the name's escaping me, but they say that they built the angle wrong, and then they make the angle a bit more inverted. Have you ever seen this one?
I think so. Yeah. So these guys were super advanced, and they said, "Hey, wait a minute, we messed this one up. Just keep going. Just go with it."
Exactly. So they say, it is true that a lot of pharaohs later on tried to duplicate the pyramids, but they did horrible jobs. I mean, all you have to do is look up.
Yeah. They progressed linearly, except for when they went straight back. The construction went straight back down, and that's one of the things that I found fascinating. When I can't remember what the structure is called, where they have the gigantic, like almost like they look like tombs, but I don't know what they are. They have like the lids that weigh 70 tons. I'm talking about.
Yeah. That's in golly. Well, that's in multiple places. Why is the name escaping me? I don't know if I don't believe it's the Valley of Kings. I was just looking at a video of that. But they have the giant sarcophagus that are like 10, 12 feet tall.
It's like unexplainable how they got them in the places, because they're very like the structure. It's almost like they had to be lowered in somehow, because it's crazy. You couldn't walk them in, and it's like I don't care how many men you had. Actually, the more men you had, you couldn't angle you couldn't fit men in there to carry it. And the interesting part about it, and this is what I would say that I started to notice when they were showing one of these guys who was in, like, a lot of these guys who debunked like the mainstream Egyptologists are people who are in the fields of these things, where like they're stone cutters, and then they start taking angles to like those the sarcophagus or whatever they are, those boxes, and they're perfectly level. They're polished granite, and then a lot of times you see hieroglyphs that are put on them, and the hieroglyphs look like garbage. They look like they were scratched on, and it's like the person who made the box did not do that, because I'm guaranteed those hieroglyphs would be perfect.
Oh, of course,
because everything else is. So I think what a lot of us believe now is that the dynastic Egyptians found some of this stuff. They squatted on this area, and they built upon it. But it's kind of like, if I built my house next to the Washington Monument, it doesn't mean I built the Washington Monument. It's like,
exactly.
Like people would have, I think that some of these sites could have been holy sites. They could have been something significant, obviously, to their culture, and therefore they built next to it. But that doesn't mean they built the biggest structure, the biggest and the best.
Yeah, well, it's becoming more theorized and even in some ways plausible that you know, you had like a cataclysmic event that really shook the world up, and I would probably disagree a lot with people of Abrahamic religions, you know, whether you're like Jewish or Christian or Muslim or whatever. There would be some places where I would have some disagreements. So I'm questioning a bit more if it was just, you know, Noah and his family that would have survived. There could have been more people, but aside from that, you know, I think that 99.9999999% of the world's population was destroyed by a certain event, and even the scientific evidence supports that. Whether or not that is the Younger Dryas event is actually the event of the Bible, I guess that's up for debate, because it does say that the world was flooded, and the last time that happened was about 9,600 BC. So the scientific evidence suggests. I suppose the carbon dating on that could be wrong. Otherwise, the only other thing would be some kind of flooding around, some kind of massive flooding around Mesopotamia that just destroyed that whole area. But anyways, you know, you have a few people that survive, as the evidence suggests, in the Fertile Crescent, which is Mesopotamia, which is very similar to the area that they say Noah's Ark would have landed, and where, you know, civilization would have blossomed again. And so you've got Mesopotamia, which is northeast of Egypt, and so you've got people going into the Middle East. You've got some people going to Europe. You've got some people going to Asia, and then you've got some people going down southwest into Africa, who they're probably walking across. It's probably not as arid. You know, who knows, between 6 to 10,000 years ago, it's probably not as arid. It was probably a bit more tropical than it is today. And they're walking through this area, and boom, three huge pyramids and potentially a sphinx. And obviously that's, you just stumble across that. Obviously that has some kind of importance, you know. So that seems to be something that a lot of people are entertaining the idea towards. That the scientific community completely rejects that. But a lot of people like you and I are entertaining the idea of, well, maybe there's some truth to this. And it seems like the armor is being nicked as far as the traditional narrative of our linear path, you know.
Right. I mean, obviously I believe the biblical account of the flood. And I think that leads, like, I know that, you know, some people obviously take the dating of the Bible as far as the genealogies completely literal, and I lean more to that scale, especially when they start dating Adam to, you know, basically to Noah, to the, you know, like when, because those seem specific to me. Now there's certain ones where they talk about ancestors, and they talk about like, this is the one I've been getting into recently, where you're seeing one of Cush's sons was, one of Noah's sons was Cush, and then it says Cush had 4 sons, and then it said he fathered, or some translation says he also had an ancestor named Nimrod. And I think there's a big room for a lot of stuff that happened in between those accounts. And so my feeling is that when you have structures such as the Great Pyramids, and the truth of the matter, and I think this is what more of the point why I like having Luke on here, is that more of us who have started to like question things, and you realize that talk about stuff that's built on sand is their case for what happened, and you realize they're basing it on some guy said this, and therefore we wrote it in a book, and now our facts are based on that, and we can all speculate based off what he said. But the truth is, we don't know how they built the pyramids, because it's like because we don't build anything like that right now.
No.
And so my feeling is if you had a worldwide cataclysm, whether you believe it's the flood like I do, and I think even Luke obviously believes that that could be it, whether he believes somebody might have survived other than Noah's family. But if you had a massive cataclysm, a flood, everything would probably be ruined. Everything would be gone. So any kind of evidence of what they used to build things, like the writing they had, if they had anything written down, any kind of if they had electronics, would have been all gone. But if you had stones that weighed, but sometimes up to like 1 million pounds in like some places, like that's probably what would be left when water receded, because they have, the desert has man-made mountains, basically. That's what because that's pretty much what they are. That's what would be left. And then meanwhile, then you have all these ancient mythologies, all these ancient cultures talking about something that happened, like an ancient time, a time before, a golden age. And I was just recently reading that even the Egyptians, who don't claim they built these things, because they talk about a time when they built, when they lived amongst the gods, they called it a golden age called Zep Tepi. So it's like, so they're referring to a time when the gods lived amongst them, and they even called these things we were talking about Naturu, who were partially divine. They had another they had the other beings were called let me pull this up. They said the Urshu. The Urshu were intermediaries between gods and men, and they were the category of lesser divinities, and whose title meant, and this is from Graham Hancock's book, The Fingerprints of the Gods. Urshu means the Watchers. So the Watchers are literally, as far as us who believe the biblical account, there's a time that talks about when the sons of Genesis 6, when the sons of man came to the daughters of men. So the sons of God in Enoch, they're called Watchers. Actually, in the book of Daniel, angels are called Watchers. So some of these accounts are like, there are biblical explanations for these things. Now, are we going to ever know all the facts? No, but I think that we're coming to a place now where, like, the Joe Rogans of the world, the ancient alien people, they have like some, they can point out that we don't know how they built these things. And if they're establishing a narrative of, well, these people say gods, obviously they're idiots, so they must be aliens. And and like I said, I think that maybe we could discuss a little bit about that, as the fact that the mainstream narrative says these people were super smart. They knew advanced mathematics. They knew like chemistry. They knew the stars, but also they were like cavemen when it came to like taking credit for their own work, because they said they said these mythical gods came down and did it, and obviously that can't be true. Therefore, they did it with this this little tiny 1.5 foot saw that we found next to this giant thing.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And what's crazy is it's not just the Egyptians. We'll get into this in other episodes, but this sudden birth of civilization, creating things using these just massive megalithic stones that you can't even possibly fathom how they can move it. This isn't just in Egypt. This happens in South and Central America as well, where civilizations just appear, and then they're able to, at the very precipice of their civilization, they're able to do things that boggle our mind today. I mean, really, how does that actually happen? How long? It's one of two ways. So the scientific theory is, they say that the anatomically modern humans, so humans that look like you and I and think like you and I do, people who were born with the same IQ as Einstein, were being born 200,000 years ago. And I'm not saying, oh, well, the Earth isn't this old or that old or whatever. I don't know the exact truth for certain, but I just think it's strange that not only did 50,000 years go by, not only did 100,000 years or 150,000 years go by, but 196,000 years of human beings who are just as intelligent, and some more intelligent than you and I. 196,000 years, they don't create a single thing of you know, that can actually withstand time that we can still see today. And then the first time that they do it, they're wonders of the world. Like nobody can recreate it. You know, nobody can recreate a lot of these places. It's just obviously the traditional narrative is flawed. It's pretty obvious for everybody to see.
Well, I think the term fake news has obviously been really used a lot lately. And then you start to realize that if the news is fake, what about stuff that they're writing about that said happened thousands and thousands of years ago? And you, like, they tell you all the time that history, the winners write the history books, which is basically trying to tell you that, you know what, don't believe everything you read in the history books, because it might not have happened like that. And I feel like that more than anything, like, there's a narrative. Like I said, we go back to it's an evolutionary scale, because the evolutionary model does not make sense if it's not this 45 degree angle up. And maybe it's really long, because you're saying it's 100,000 years, 200,000 years. When you realize that there was obviously some peaks and valleys, and there might have been a massive valley, because the people, like, that's the one thing that I like to focus on, is when you talk about the ancient Greeks, then you talk about the ancient Egyptians, and these people are not even the ancient. They wouldn't even call themselves the ancient ones. We're talking about Plato, and Socrates, and the people who were the dynastic Egyptians. And they talk about an ancient time, and they refer back to before the clear dividing line of when there was a massive cataclysm, and now there's this mythology of what happened before. But these people are obviously way closer to what was before than we are. And I don't think that anyone considers, the Greek philosophers idiots. I think they're pretty. No, I think everyone says they're pretty smart. They knew math. They knew how to build things. Like, maybe they didn't make iPhones, but that doesn't. Well, iPhones break. As we had massive technical difficulties early in this podcast, they might not have made computers, but that doesn't mean that they have other kinds of technologies. They even talk about some of the stuff the Romans built that they forgot how to build later. And you're like, that doesn't make, like, the Romans wrote everything down. Do you think they forgot something?
No.
Like that's not a that doesn't pass the smell test for me anymore.
Yeah. Well, and of all civilizations, Rome, I mean, give me a break. Thank you. Rome is like it's the center point of all of humanity. You know what I mean? Everything, I don't know exactly how to explain it, but it's the center point of our entire story. And to think that there's something that they forgot how to do, it's ridiculous. We know that they were recording history. Egypt was recording history before Rome even reached its precipice. So I mean, I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to. But it's a ridiculous idea.
I'm just saying that, and actually I would disagree a little bit, because I would say that what's interesting is when you find out, like, that the Greeks and the Romans, and then they kind of always looked back to the Egyptians. So, like, as we were talking before, it's like that one day I think I was telling you, I was trying to look up the mythology of Atlantis. I just wanted to know what Plato said about it. And I didn't Google, is Atlantis real? Have they found it? But I said Atlantis mythology, and I had probably on Google, it was like 5 out of 8 results were like Atlantis debunked, and it was like, I didn't ask if it was true or not. I just want to know what he said.
What's this fetish with debunking things? You ever notice this?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like, first of all, like, so the story of Atlantis is that, or even before the story, was that there was a Greek philosopher named Solon that went to Egypt, and he got the tale and brought it back. And I think he might have told it to somebody who told it to Plato. And the only thing that's
I think he lived like 200 years before Plato or something.
It was the only thing that anybody would find really outlandish about it is that Poseidon basically was fathered this place. So it was a god fathered this, which, like I said, lines right up with Genesis 6, is you had a god had sons, and the sons ruled over this place, and eventually it became really corrupt, pretty much exactly like, and then it had to be destroyed by flood. And basically exactly like the biblical account, obviously told through a different lens, but I find it interesting that that a lot of things always go back to Egypt. Like there's this fascination with Egypt. The pyramids are obviously mysterious structures, but still in our culture today, we have the Washington monuments and obelisk. We have the pyramid on. We have the pyramid on the. We have the pyramid on the back of the dollar bill. We have a lot of things that go back to this culture, and we don't really have probably a lot of Egyptian immigrants in this country.
Yeah. Hey, you're in Virginia, right?
Oh yeah. Yes, sir.
Have you been to Jefferson's Monticello before?
I've been as a young child. I need to go back because it's probably something I didn't really pay too close attention to when I was a kid.
So, well, you probably wouldn't even thought about this as a kid. But when I was there, I didn't know this. He was obsessed with Egypt. And I stood over his bed where he died, and his clock is 2 obelisks. And with it was sent to him from Egypt, and he's got a giant what is the wall, the old tapestry? He's got a huge tapestry hanging from his wall, and it's all ancient Egypt. And he's got artifacts that were sent to him from ancient Egypt that are sitting in his living room. And his tombstone is the first obelisk ever built in the United States. It's actually what the Washington Monument is based on. And
interesting.
So
that's interesting. Yeah. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I walked down to his house is on top of it's like a huge hill or a mountain. And you walk down to his graveyard, and you see the obelisk. And I was thinking, that's really weird. So I look up when he died, and it's like 1828 or something like that. So I go back up, and I know there's historians that work there, and I go, and now I look up when the Washington Monument was built, and it's like 1850s or 1870s or something like that. And so I walk back up. I'm like, so I don't know if any of you guys will be able to answer this, but his tombstone is an Egyptian obelisk. That's the only shape that is. And the guy's like, yep. And I was like, and it was built before the Washington Monument. And he was like, yep, it's what the Washington Monument's based on. And I was like, oh God, that's crazy. And then turns out he had a bunch of connections in Egypt, and he was obsessed with Egypt. And Thomas Jefferson had the biggest personal library, I believe, in the United States for sure. And it was the 3rd biggest library in the country, behind Harvard and some other school, Yale, so maybe, or Harvard, or some other American university at the time. And so we had the 3rd biggest personal library. And when he died, almost all of his books were taken back to DC immediately. So I wish that, I wonder what his books on ancient Egypt and ancient history were like, because from the mid 1800s to today, those books are completely different. Even Bibles are different back then. The wording that they use adds so much more context. So I'm sorry to kind of steer off.
No, that's actually that's a real good thing, because that's kind of what I was kind of getting at, was that there's a fascination with Egypt that's more than just, this is weird.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that we can get into, like, for one, we'll just mention, obviously, flat out, obviously Thomas Jefferson is one of these Freemasons. We know that, like, Washington was a Freemason. There's so many that were the founding fathers. I think they said like 31 of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, Freemasons.
Yeah.
Then we have the Illuminati pyramid on our dollar bill.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's something to it. And of course, we know in these clubs, these things date back to the Babylon mystery schools. They date back to Egypt. They date back probably to before the flood, because it's secret knowledge. And I think overall, that's why when we look at the mainstream narrative for Egypt, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And that's the point, is we were saying, like, when they say that these pyramids were tombs, the Great Pyramid, there's nothing they didn't find mummies in there. They didn't find no bodies. They found nothing decorated in it. And so it's funny when my brother and I like to always talk about the end of Indiana Jones. Is when they get the ark, and the ark goes back and gets put in a crate, and it just gets stuck in some warehouse. And so the question I basically came to the conclusion, if they ever found anything in there, for one, it's probably in somebody's private collection, right? If they found anything, if they found it, because we know they were digging in the ground in there long before Egyptology became like,
of course,
that was even a word.
Mm.
And if they found anything really cool now, would they tell us? Because we know it would, because they know it would change the narrative. And there's a reason like that. Some guy from Virginia in the 1700s give us, like, why would he care about ancient Egypt?
Yeah, exactly right.
Because I think that there is some kind of a knowledge, some gnosis that dates back of what they did, what they know, why, like why they did the things they did, why obelisks are still a thing, why the Vatican has obelisks too. Like they took a bunch of stuff from Egypt. It's weird, right? When it's like, if you're God is Jesus Christ, like why are you putting a bunch of clearly pagan stuff near your church?
Yeah, and why do they? I was gonna say, why do they have rituals where they open up the doors and they let the shadow of the obelisk impregnate the throne of the Vatican? Have you heard about this?
I have not, but it doesn't surprise me because I heard even this. This can go back to like, so in Washington D.C. Well, I'll let you finish that. Is that you have the Washington Monument and it has the reflection pool that points right at the rotunda, the Capitol building, and so you have basically the big phallic symbol, and then it goes right toward the pregnant belly. So you have Osiris, you have like Osiris, and you have Isis.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I'd never thought of that, but yeah, that's true. Man, there's so much. It's honestly insane. And then you've got. So I'm curious about this. I got a question for you. What does the owl represent? Like owl in mythology, or in
Okay, so the owl. A lot of people. It's interesting, and this is confusing to me because a lot of the stuff is It's like the pagan religion stuff. It put it this way. I believe the Tower of Babel story obviously is legitimate. You have these confused languages, and then in these, like the religion is the same. It's changed. It's morphed to the cultures that it's in.
Yeah.
So of course people talk about Bohemian Grove, and then there's an owl effigy.
Yeah.
And that's where they're doing it. It's like, and they call that Moloch. So Moloch, but I see Moloch represented as a bull as well.
Yes, that's why I was curious.
And so there's obviously there's I think owls are obviously, they have this kind of dark presence. They're spooky. They're also like known as wise. And I did a video recently where I talked about our medals of honor, and they have Minerva. I said it wrong. I was calling her Minerva, and everyone was saying you're an idiot. And I was like, my bad. I'm sorry for getting y'all's pagan god's name wrong. It's Minerva. It's Minerva.
Yeah.
And
sorry about that.
Yeah, and one of her, I really offended all these people. and so one of her symbols was the owl. And so I guess that's the question is like, so I've heard it's the owl's related to Moloch. And that's pretty much, of course, Moloch is like the most wicked version of, I guess, whatever that god is. That's the one that's the children.
Now, didn't people? Yeah. So children sacrifice. Yeah.
Well, what's interesting in the Bible, and I was just recently reading this. I believe it was in Leviticus. I think it was Leviticus 21, and it starts talking about all the sexual sins to not do, and it was listing them all in a row. And what I found very interesting, it was like, don't have sex with your neighbor's wife, don't sacrifice your kids to Moloch, and then don't do this. And it was like right in there. And I started to think, like, was the Moloch sacrifice, is that abortion? Because I was starting to think like in the place it was listed at, it was like, obviously if you're having sex with your neighbor's wife and you get her pregnant, it's like, why is that in there? And if it's not something,
so that's step 2. Yeah, what you're saying.
I think that it is. I think that that's a very clear form that it could, put it this way. I don't know for sure, but I find it very curious that that passage in Leviticus, it's all about sexual sins. And then it says, in the middle of it, don't sacrifice your kids to Moloch. And it's like, so they wouldn't call it a fetus in the Bible. They would they would call it a child. They wouldn't even call it a baby.
Yeah. A fetus, that's not even a concept.
No,
at that time.
So yeah, so there's the owl, and it's like, that's of course, we're not 33rd degree Masons, so we don't know all of the things, but we do know that we do know the owl is one of their symbols.
Yeah, that is yeah, I just find that crazy, you know, and you get into the owl symbolism. So that's about what I thought. That's about what I thought, that there Moloch was also represented by a bull and is also used as an owl. And you know, and I tell people about, you know, now I don't really talk about this on my channel. It's just not my interest to dive into it on a daily basis. But I'll tell people there's a lot of weird stuff out there, and you got all these people who are just blind. They have no idea, you know, and I'll tell them, I'll go, okay, you know, and I'll show them, well, this is at the Bohemian Grove, and this is what the owl means. This is Moloch. Moloch is the god of child sacrifice in the Bible. It's a very clear connection. They go, yeah, well, what does that have to do anything? You go to Google Earth and you look at the Lincoln Memorial, and it's a damn owl. You know? Sorry, I didn't mean to cuss.
No, that's okay.
I'll rewind that. So you go on Google Earth and you look at the Lincoln Memorial, and it's an owl. And you even have owls on our dollar bill. You at the top right corner on the back side.
Yeah.
And you start asking people this, and then they just shut down. It's like their brainwashing is so it is in every fiber of their being. It can't be anything more than biblical how brainwashed these people are. It's like they have a ceiling that they can't get past. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Well, I think that my other buddy Luke from the Voice of Reason, we often talk about like a simulation or a matrix. Of course, I don't believe we live in a computer program. I'm not.
No, not at all.
But I do believe that the devil, you know, the people in charge have created this like an illusion of like what's important. And so the things that don't relate directly to me is like I don't need that information. It's like that's not important. You know, like if anything's heavy, you know, if anything's really that heavy, I don't want that bringing me down. So I don't even want to know about it. And but overall, I was going to lead into the fact that when we looked at history in school, it's so boring. History is so boring.
Oh man, it's
so boring. But I think when you grow up a little, become a man, you get to look into what you want to. You find out there's a lot here, and it explains a lot of the things that we see now. It's like what is it? It's like what Solomon said. There's nothing new under the sun. What was, what will be again. Yeah. And I think that when you look back, like this is why so when you find out Egypt is important to a guy like Jefferson, who was one obviously, if he's not one of the founding fathers, he's like the founding father. He's one of the guys who set this whole place up.
Yep.
Like how does that relate to us? It's like, well, it's interesting to find out. Like there's a lot of questions and we might not ever know them all. But our history is a very good indicator of which direction we're going, like what their goals are. And I feel like that you're absolutely correct that people don't want to know. And it's like, why not? Because it's like it's super interesting.
Oh, just that alone, it's really interesting. You know, it's incredibly interesting. And I'm with you, man. A lot of people don't really care to know the history of the world. They're so comfortable in their life, and I can't even explain it. What other, you know, you and I, we're history guys. Everything you do is you talk about a lot about stuff that's going on currently, but it is intimately tied into the very beginning of our history. And for someone to not be interested in that is almost inhuman.
Yes. Well, I think that was probably how Luke and I connected, is because I started to look in. My TikTok channel has been about exposing the darkness, and it's like the Holy Spirit, or just kind of my own just curiosity has kind of started to lead me into like the Freemasonry stuff, and then I was going into the Art Deco stuff, and it looks absolutely right. The Art Deco stuff that was built mostly between, I guess, like the 20s and the 30s. There are these buildings, and they are, I mean, the structures they built in that time, let's just say they don't build them like they used to, because those things are so fascinating. And yeah, they all do have like an homage to the Greeks, to the Romans, to the Egyptians. And there's something there when you find out the people who were responsible for these buildings, like you said, the Chrysler building was one of them. Obviously, you know, you have like the General Electric building, which is like Thomas Edison, and like what is this about? When you start to, I don't know if you're familiar with that show, it was the Men Who Built America. I found that really fascinating.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a pretty fascinating show because of course it's all about like Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, and so they're showing these guys. And when you find out these are the guys who built these buildings, and then you realize Henry Ford, these are the people who are responsible for these. They don't build them like they used to. These people built these things, and then you find out these guys were in the club. They're Freemasons.
Oh, of course.
They're this and that. And it's like, so they're throwing back to this previous time. So when you find out all the movers and shakers, the people who are really big into everything, they're talking about ancient Egypt. And it's of course then Luke is looking at, I guess that's the pivot point, is like you have ancient Egypt, but then you have things all over the world that we were never told about in history class, like that not only can they not, you find out not only can they not explain this pyramid. What about this pyramid in Mexico? What about this other one? What about all the pyramids they don't even talk about? That if we had this linear progression in society, well, why is it so displaced everywhere? Like like it makes no sense. If we all came from like basically, you know, and a lot of people, even biblically, we believe like there's the Garden of Eden is somewhere around Mesopotamia. Meanwhile, well, how did those things get over to South America? How were they living in the dark? How were they like basically hiding in the woods in Europe back in those days? And then Europe progressed to the point where they were strong enough to come across the sea and take over these people who had way more advanced structures than they had in Europe at like 1,000 years before. And then you realize, guess what? They've been lying to us. Like they've been lying to us forever.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling, man. There's so much that we don't know. Even the pyramid. Well, you mentioned Mexico, so that would be Tiahuanaco, and Tiahuanaco, or I'm sorry, Teotihuacan. Sometimes Tiahuanaco and Teotihuacan, I guess
that's way too similar.
Yeah. So Tiahuanaco is in Peru, ancient Peruvian area. Teotihuacan is in Mexico, and it is the third biggest pyramid in the world, I believe. I'm not sure what the second one is. It might just be in Egypt, but the first one is obviously Giza. So it's the third biggest pyramid in the world. It's unbelievably massive structure that's astronomically, it's perfectly aligned north and south. And what's really interesting is the pyramids of Giza, they represent Osiris. I believe the Osiris constellation,
or is it Orion's belt? Right?
Yes, it's Orion's belt, but it was recognized as the constellation of Osiris, I believe. Okay. And this is where the Egyptians, could be wrong, but I do believe this is where the Egyptians believed that their gods of Zep-Tepi came down from the heavens. They came down from, so they didn't recognize it as Orion's belt. They recognized it as the Osiris constellation. And they believed that their gods from Zep-Tepi came down from there. Well, what's really interesting is that the pyramids at Teotihuacan have the exact same alignment, and all the way in Mexico. And that's about I believe that's the only connection from Teotihuacan to Egypt, is that those pyramids are aligned in the same way, which that's a huge connection there. There's something there. Either they were looking at something very similar, they both recognized this constellation, and they decided to build the same type of structure, both aligned astronomically to that constellation. But Teotihuacan is so mysterious and is so old that archaeologists, at first they thought the Aztecs built them, and then they're like, no, the Aztecs didn't build that. And then they found out about an older civilization called the Toltecs, and then they realized, nah, the evidence doesn't show that the Toltecs built this either. And so archaeology is different from Egypt to Central and South America. It's somewhat corrupt in both places, but honestly, in the Americas, it's a bit more, in my opinion, it's a bit more honest. So, and then they take a step back on saying that the Toltecs built it. Now they just say that the Teotihuacanos built it, and they leave that there. So that'd be like us saying that, oh, well, the Gizans built the pyramids on Giza Plateau. It's
well, that's basically what they do, because they say, oh, the ancient Egyptians built it, and it's like, well, what is that? What's an ancient Egyptian? That's like Egypt is a country, you know, like Egypt is a nation, and it's kind of like America is a continent now, but it's like, yeah, you say like, oh yeah, the Virginians built this thing that's here, and it's like, well, there was Virginians afterwards, but like, and now it's called Virginia, but that's not not actually a thing. One thing I found fascinating, and this is what's the interesting thing that I think ties a lot of stuff together, is that all these places where they have these things, they're astronomically aligned, and they all, like, a lot of them involve sun worship. Like sun worship is like a massive thing around the world, and serpent worship,
specifically,
like deifying snakes, when most people would see, like, I think it's funny. I think it's like, if you like a baby duck hatches, you put something that looks like a snake next to them, they'll know to be scared of it.
Right. Exactly. Right.
Most people don't venerate snakes because they're like, oh gosh, that thing's gross.
Yeah.
And so what I find fascinating is that, I'll just ask you this question, is, so the people who are native to Mexico, when they find these things, who did they say built these things?
Well, the Aztecs, I don't believe the Aztecs ever took credit for building Teotihuacan. I believe that their story is not that they didn't say that the gods built them. Like, a lot of people say that the gods built these sites that they're at, especially in North America, like the Mississippian mound cities. Have you ever seen those?
No, I have not.
So you can look up like the Mississippian mound cities. They're these big cities that are also astronomically aligned in a similar way to Teotihuacan in Egypt, built in similar ways to Egypt and Teotihuacan. The Cherokee Indians or whatever Native North Americans were here at the time that colonization was happening, they never took credit for building these mountains. They said that the gods built them. Now, Teotihuacan in Mexico, the Aztecs just say that these sites were always here, which, for them, that is true. But you go down to Peru and Bolivia, and it starts getting really weird, because the legends of that area are that Tiahuanaco is what I was saying. That's a really strange site. Sacsayhuaman, some parts of Machu Picchu, I believe. The ancient Peruvians at the time, according to their literature and what they like, their verbal account, is that they say that the gods built some of these sites, that they were always here, and that these are from civilizations much farther before them. And the Aztecs even talk about their mother civilization that they, that they're derived from, which is called Aztlan. Have you ever heard of this?
No, I heard some of these accounts, and I'm not sure if it was the Aztecs, but some of them were claiming these really white, like super, like gleaming white people, like I know there was a South American account where they were saying like
the weeping, yeah.
They were
the
like
weeping god.
They were like white giants, like that helped build these things, and of course as you go back to Genesis 6. Some translations of Nephilim as giants, and of course we know that there was giants in the land, and it's sort of interesting that we disregard the people who were there, like that their accounts of how it happened. It's like, because our mainstream scientific brain says, well, we know there's no such thing as giants, we know there's no such thing as gods, so therefore that's wrong. But they don't really give a good counter argument for how it's possible, why a people who could build such a thing would disappear. And then we go back to the Atlantis tale. They disregard the idea of lost civilizations, when we know for sure that there's lost civilizations all over the world.
Oh yeah, of course. Look at Troy. Troy's a lost civilization. Man, they thought that whole thing was a myth until they found the city. And to your point, I'm actually meeting in the next couple of weeks maybe next month. I'm meeting with a guy named Dr. Edwin Barnhart, and he done a lot of work in Central America. He I believe he worked on the lost city of Palenque, which is a Mayan site in Central America. Now the Mayans don't have a lot of, they're very mysterious in some of the things that they knew, but as far as their architecture, when you look at it, it doesn't resemble this kind of mysterious, huge megalithic, stonework. A lot of it is stones about this big that are just really perfectly built. But anyways, his one of his biggest quotes, I suppose, or one of the things he pushes is that in all the research that and you can find this on his website, and he one of the things that has in quotations is he says, of all the research that we've done, the case was almost always invariably right that the locals of the area knew what they were talking about. You know what I mean? Every single time that the people who live there tell you something, it ends up being true, So yeah, you're totally right. It is so bizarre how we look back on our ancient ancestors, and we see the people who built the pyramids, and then we go, pyramids, every ancient pyramid, we look back on their culture and we go, yeah, these people were clearly, they were clearly, stonemasons. They could move stones in South and Central America. They could move stones up and down mountain ranges, and they were not using the wheel. I don't know if you knew this. There were no horses in the Americas before the Spanish arrived.
That's right. Yeah, I remember hearing that. Yeah, because they were like terrified of like cavalry.
Yeah. They didn't have horses. They didn't have beasts of burden. Anything. I think they had buffalo, but those aren't used as beasts of burden. They didn't have ox and stuff like that. So they're doing all of this by hand for some kind of incredibly profound reason. Nobody would do this for no reason. So they're doing all this for an incredibly profound reason, obviously. And they're obviously master stonemasons. They line up their cities astronomically, astrologically. They are aware of the sun and stars.
They all have the same constellations. When I've always been one of those guys, and they say, "Well, I see the Big Dipper." The rest of them, I don't know what y'all are talking about. Like they would have the same zodiac signs, and you're like, how did they know that?
Exactly. And another thing is they all use bow and arrows as well. So it's pretty obvious that all these civilizations connect at a certain point. You know what I mean? Not many people think about that. They all had swords and they all had bows and arrows, on every single side of the planet. So obviously we all derive from a similar place. Nobody really disputes that, but I feel like sometimes we kind of overlook that.
Well, I think one thing you said the other night when we were on the phone, I think we're going to a point where we need to start wrapping it up. But I thought the one thing that you said that really was a great point when you were saying, we were talking about the flood, and you're saying, what kind of place would it have been like? What would it have to have been there? The God would need to destroy the whole place. You want to talk about he would need to destroy the whole thing? Like what would be more likely?
Commonly accepted idea. I don't think a lot of people really dive into, well, what exactly would the world have been like if God were to, flood the earth? I guess it's not a incredibly important question in relation to somebody's salvation, because it doesn't really matter what you believe as long as you believe that Jesus was the sacrificial lamb for your sins. Anyways, so, but does it make more sense in everybody's mind? They think about in the days of Noah, well, there may have been some towns that were, at least in my head, I think of these like rundown, kind of muddy little villages. Some are tents, some are buildings.
We have like when we see like the pictures of like when you went to Sunday school, and there's like the stuff that's in there. Everybody's wearing like sheepskin, and like they're walking the little animals up the boat, and obviously there's some like little houses in the background, but it's like they're probably like huts.
And you've got all these, and what are these people doing? Like some of them are murdering each other, and you've got some of them practicing witchcraft, and so you got these few villages that are around, not really too much going on, and God goes, and he just destroys the whole planet.
It's like, yeah,
it's kind of a ridiculous idea.
Well, yeah, it's like it's the idea of why would God have to flood the whole earth to destroy like some hunter gatherers' houses?
Yeah,
like
it would have to be, yeah, it would have to be, it would have to be something that is so heinous and so progressed and so far along that is absolutely irredeemable. And more than likely, what I think that is that there's obviously a relationship between men and women of the earth and fallen angels who, that came down to the earth. And in my opinion, I think they made gods among themselves. They built cities all over the world, and they wanted to reign on the planet, and they were having children with women, and these children were being like demigods, and these were great rulers. And whether or not these actual gods, or whether or not these actual fallen angels were physically present, I believe that they ruled from behind the scenes, and through people's minds, probably in the same way that they do today. But I think they had a physical manifestation in a child, who was a Nephilim, or a great ruler, like a man of renown, who was ruling. They were ruling over these people.
Yeah,
that's what I think. And I think that there was probably 2,000 years at least of this, around 2,000 years of this happening. And it had to be so irredeemable and so widespread that it had to be completely wiped off the earth.
Yeah,
and so that's what I think.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting point is that what he just said, and that's what I believe. That's the Genesis 6 narrative. Now, I think when you go to Sunday school, when you go to like mainstream brick and mortar churches, they never would talk about any of this stuff like we're talking about. But the interesting part is these structures, and this is how we tied this all together for like the JC who follows JC wants to talk about this, is this actually ties into what's there. Like this is the stuff that they're not telling us is like, so why do all these pyramids exist that we can't explain? Why do all these pyramids are temples to these things, the sun, the serpents, all these things?
Mm-hmm.
And then even the people, the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, they talk about a time before. They talk about a golden age. And of course, and it was the golden age was when the gods lived amongst them. Yep. And so it all makes sense that it's like what those people told us is more true than what we're told right now. And it's actually, sadly, it's more true than what we're told in a lot of churches, because they try to dismiss the fact that Goliath was only like 6 foot tall. He was just, the Israelites were just real short. He was like an average sized guy. But when it comes down to it, it's like that's absolutely right. That when you realize that the Bible talks about the sons of God coming amongst the daughters of men, you also realize that Adam walked with God. So it's like, so if he was with God for, Adam was for like 900 years, he probably knew a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Like so the first men, the first women were not cavemen. They were not dumb. So they built things, and of course, it wasn't that they didn't get killed because they were dumb. They got killed because they were wicked at the end.
Yeah.
And I find that very interesting that actually the things that Luke talks about, and what we're going to continue to talk about in future podcasts, is who these people were. Like, is there an explanation for it? Like, I think some of these things are mysteries, and that's kind of why it's fun to talk about. Like, we'll never really know about all this stuff, but it's actually, and I honestly think, like, we talk about like respecting native cultures. I think it's a lot more respectful to actually consider what they say than to dismiss.
Oh, right.
It's instead of saying like, that's what a lot of people talk about, culture appropriation. They talk about all this other stuff, and it's like, how about this? I believe them a lot more than I believe a guy who came, 2,000 years later and said, "Nuh-uh, that couldn't happen like that."
Oh, exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. I think that's so true. I also think what you said the other day about, we got in the conversation about there is technology in heaven, and I think that what you said the other day was pretty poignant about, what if these pyramids being built? What if these just look like home to these angelic beings? What if there are pyramids in heaven? I'd never even thought of that But the first weapon that we hear about in the Bible is the flaming sword that's put at the
Yeah,
front of the Garden of Eden.
absolutely.
There are swords in the Bible. Well, then we also hear about there's streets of gold. Well, then I think like, yeah, were these streets of gold, were they just snapped into place, or are there architects in heaven? That's an art. That seems
Well,
like something that would be used to glorify God. And then I start thinking like, dang man, like maybe all of this comes from what is beyond us.
well, I think that yeah. To that point is that I was saying that. So when Moses goes up to Mount Sinai and he starts getting instructions on how to build things, he's being told what it looks like in heaven. So
Yeah, exactly.
so the tabernacle is a representation, and that's why it's very specific. Like it's almost funny when you start reading into Exodus and you start seeing how specific God is on
Mhm.
the how big this thing is. And then Solomon's temple is obviously a representation of the same thing. And then so it does stand to reason. It's logical that if the other gods came, the sons of God who were there when God created everything, they've been to
Mhm.
heaven, they've been to earth. If they wanted to build their own heaven on earth, maybe they wanted to make it look like home. So that actually has a pretty decent explanation of why they built similar structures across the
Mhm.
world. I guess the other thought could be that mountains and gods were associated with each other because it was where the heavens and the earth met together.
Mhm.
And they could also be possibly a representation of a man-made mountain to this god.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but it's interesting, and that makes a lot more sense than everything was either a temple or a tomb because we can't explain
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, exactly. And this is last thing I'll say. It's really interesting. And we definitely are going to talk about this in the future because there's so much to get into in Egypt. But when you look at how the pyramids on the Giza plateau and especially Khufu's pyramid, the Great Pyramid, um, when you look inside of it, and they've done like scanning on the inside of it, and you can see what the king's chamber looks like and how many levels it has of these I believe it's rose granite, solid rose granite, going up to
Unbelievable.
80 tons, and the 80 tons are put in the ceiling. Can you imagine the ceiling of something being 80 tons? And not only that, so you have a big 80-ton block. There's a huge space in between there where it's just like a cavity in the middle of the ceiling, and above that you have another block and a space, and another block and a space, and it does it 8 times. And then there's like a little roofing. I'm not exactly sure what the technical term is, but it's built inside of it. And then people go, "What the heck was that for?" You know what? It's just really odd for it to be a tomb, and I won't go as far to say that oh, this was a 100% energy device, or that this is about it's a resonation device. I really don't know. I'll just come out and say I really don't know. Um, but I'm also open just to the fact that these were built alone to that these could have built alone been built to represent what is beyond our world, what things look like in heaven.
Yeah, that was
And
yeah.
yeah,
That's
so you saying that kind of opened my mind up to another possibility. And
well,
I if that were true, I'd be content with just that explanation.
what's interesting is I think it's Oscar J. Hansen was the guy who built the Dam Angels. Of course, because
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
we got to talk about the Hoover Dam just for a second.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Is Oscar J. Hansen, when they were building the Hoover Dam, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard this, but they probably don't even know it's associated with him. The Dam Angel guy
Mhm.
is that he was saying when they were building the Hoover Dam that it was like on the level of the Great Pyramids. And I think a lot of people would just at the very basically normie take would just say, "Oh, just because it's big. Oh, just because there's a
Mhm.
lot of concrete. Oh, it's because and then you start to understand the Hoover Dam is a hydroelectric dam. It's a thing. It's got a practical use. It's like
Mhm.
it's meant for something. So maybe he said it like that because the pyramids were something similar on the level of the Hoover Dam, where it was
Yeah.
they, when you realize how dense they are, how big they are,
Mhm.
like what is it for you? You're saying like there's like was it two or three shafts and there's like this chamber and
Mhm.
there's a shaft going into the ground. It maybe there was some kind of machine in there like that did something like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
that's I guess that's the thing we'll never know, and I think that is why that's why this stuff is fascinating, because
Mhm.
for one, we know that they've lied to us. We know that what they're saying is not true. So now that does lead us to speculate wildly and just kind of wonder and just try to see the clues in society, and if they do actually, if there is something to tell us. But anyways, it's always interesting, and I think Luke and I, we like mysteries and we like the truth. So we're trying.
I'm sure we're gonna do a lot of these episodes.
So we'll definitely be back. But just before we go, I say Luke is on. Where can we find you at, Luke? I'll let you.
So just YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. Luke Caverns, LukeCaverns. Luke Caverns, like the cave caverns, and I just talk about different lost civilizations, and I also talk about the possibility of a pre-cataclysmic or a pre-flood civilization or civilizations. There may have been, there could have been more than one.
Yeah. Sure.
And so that's pretty much what I get into. Yeah,
definitely. And so we're gonna wrap this up, and so thanks for coming on, Luke. And like I said, we'll definitely have Luke definitely come back on, and we'll of course look for future collaborations, and I don't know what we're gonna do next week on the JT Follows JC podcast without a name, but I think that this is probably what we're gonna do. Some of this we're gonna have Luke back on. I'm gonna have some my other friends on TikTok, and just kind of get into maybe what kind of videos we're making. And
I can't wait to see you and the other Luke get together.
Oh man, he's gonna talk the whole time. I'm not gonna get to talk at all.
He's got a lot to say.
He does. He's good. But yeah, definitely. So yeah, we're gonna do a lot more of this, and I think this is a good place for us TikTokers to to tell. Sometimes it's fun to talk about like the mind of like how do you even come up with these videos that you get. Especially it's funny that when you realize how much we have to talk about these things, then we got to fit it in 3 minutes. And a lot of times it's like, I got to fit it in 1 minute because people are going to stop paying attention after like 20 seconds.
I've cut the length of my videos so far down, man. It's so bad, but it's pretty cool watching your videos and then us getting to talk and how much we have in common. But then all the stuff we have to talk about. I mean, we've only been talking for an hour and a half, and we haven't even scratched the surface at all.
No, that's what I'm saying. I think that's why what this is, and probably even like some of the other collaborators, it's hard to imagine that this guy's talking about stuff that's in the jungle, in the desert, and it's super old, but the stuff is connected in some way. And I think that's where it's like that the Bible talks about in the last days that knowledge is going to increase. And I feel like that us getting together, like my boy other Luke, Voice of Reeds, and some of these other guys, my brother, our different minds and our different things, when they start to click together, it's like it's sort of amazing. And I'm looking forward to doing it again.
Cool, man. Sounds good.
All right, bro. I'll talk to you soon, bro.
All right.
Yikes. I know what y'all thinking about damn time. No, you probably weren't thinking that, were you? You're probably thinking, JT, that was a week